I'm Adam Walker, a biometrics consultant, and this is the Pharma Prescribed Podcast, where leaders, innovators, and hidden voices in healthcare open up. No sound bites, no spin, just raw insight, one prescription at a time. In an industry driven by data, protocols, and pressure, we rarely pause to ask the human questions. What drives us? What breaks us? And what truths live behind the titles we wear? Alen Hadzic is the founder and CEO of Clinical Trial Scan, where he is redefining how clinical trial enrollment is planned and executed. Rather than treating recruitment as a reactive challenge, he approaches it as an engineered system that can be modeled, predicted, and optimized before a study begins. His academic background spans financial economics and pre-medical studies at Columbia University, followed by a master's in innovation management and entrepreneurship at Vlerick Business School. Alan's perspective is shaped by years in consulting across industries including medical devices, pharmaceuticals, pricing strategy, and retail execution. He later led digital advertising and patient acquisition initiatives, gaining deep insight into how algorithms and distribution mechanics influence whether patients ever see a study opportunity. He also founded the International School of Clinical Research Advertising, training research professionals in digital visibility and patient acquisition. Earlier hands-on experience in clinical operations further reinforced his belief that enrollment is not a logistical problem, but a measurable, predictable system when properly engineered. Alen, for those of our audience who are not familiar with you, who are you and what is the mission you're on?
Adam, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. I've gotten to know you over the past few months, and you're a great chap, as they'd say over there. It's a pleasure to be here. Who am I? I am Alen Lalic. My mission really is to remove all ambiguity from clinical trial enrollment, and we can dive a little deeper into how we do that later in the podcast. But I am a former professional athlete. I am a musician. I am a writer, singer, drummer, guitar player, and a human being on this planet Earth. So pleasure to be here.
It's a delight to welcome you today, Alen. And you're clearly multi-talented and multifaceted. How does that lead into doing what you're doing with your company at the moment? And how do those skills drive the person that we see within us today?
It's a great question. Sometimes I think of that myself. A lot of people ask me where I get these ideas from. I think honestly, and I'm very grateful to especially my upbringing, my parents for placing me in so many different activities. And Lord knows that my professional athletic career took me all over the world. My business career and consulting career exposed me to a lot of different industries, not just industries, but subsets of the industries, specifically different business segments within different industries, anything from call center operations to nationwide trucking to oil and gas containers to pharmaceutical products to medical devices. I think that's really the amount of experience that I think I have, not just across my professional career as a business person or someone as a CEO running a clinical trial enrollment company, but as a experienceable travels person. I think it gives me a pretty unique perspective into the clinical trial enrollment issue that we're facing.
Thank you for clarifying. Now, I'm wondering, why was it that you landed on patient recruitment as being the thing, the lowest hanging fruit, or perhaps the most closely aligned to your purpose and vision as the area where you would expand into and create opportunity for yourself?
It's a great question. I think a lot of people would answer a question like that, which would be framed more generally as, how did you get into clinical trials? Most people would tell you that they were somehow, it dropped on them like a bomb, or somehow they found themselves in clinical trials. I think it's very similar to how I found myself in clinical trials. I was working as an independent consultant on the rollout of a Spravato, actually, which is a nasal esketamine spray for a major depressive disorder. And it was just a pretty interesting segue. Yes, that's a pharmaceutical product. Was I involved in clinical trials? No. It was more on the actual sales rollout of the product itself. But then about a few months after that, this was during COVID, I met a very good friend of mine, Artyom, who was working as an affiliate marketer. And then for those who don't know what an affiliate marketer is, it's essentially you are an advertiser, you pay money out of pocket to place ads on various social media platforms for the promise of a return on any sale of someone else's product or any lead generated for someone else. So specifically for clinical trials, or you could even equate that to like a law firm that's looking for a specific client, right? Got into an accident within the last 3 weeks, has some cardiovascular health issues, right? It is like a lead form that the client, a questionnaire that the client gives to you and says, look, take this, put it online. If someone qualifies through this questionnaire, we'll give you X amount of dollars. And my friend Artyom was working specifically on clinical trials because it was very lucrative. And he was doing very well. And he's a Facebook and Instagram expert. Thanks to him, this is really what piqued my interest in clinical trials and in advertising in general, because I realized there was a really big opportunity here. I probably did 50 or 60% of the total advertising volume for some of the world's largest recruitment vendors that we all know, whether it's SubjectWell or Accurian or Recruitment or TrialB. So all of them do some, not all of them do internal advertising, but the major ones, they do contract out all advertising to people like Artyom and then to people obviously like myself. So they paid us, for example, if we did an Alzheimer's trial, which would be maybe a little bit more difficult to qualify someone for versus, let's say, a diabetes trial, we'd get paid, I don't know, this is just an example, but 100 for the Alzheimer's trial, a qualified participant through the questionnaire, or $70 for the diabetes patient, right? And so over the course of about 3 years, I was doing this and I amassed somewhere between $5 and $7 million worth of advertising data. And then we started getting squeezed on the margins, on the reimbursement. So what used to be 100 for Alzheimer's is now 30, and it just became absolutely impossible. So essentially, with the IRB approved materials that we were provided, with the length of the questionnaire that we were provided, some of these questionnaires could be up to 50 questions long, I realized that even as complete and total experts in advertising, understanding exactly how the algorithms work, how they place ads in front of people, how to reduce the cost per lead, cost per qualified interest as low as possible with the current assets that we're given, I realized that they don't actually have a very good and solid understanding of what it actually takes to qualify one person. And hence, at that point, I just decided, okay, I would like to control this funnel. I would like to learn a little bit more about the clinical trial ecosystem. And once I found out what the main goal was, as we all know, is to enroll a subject, that's when I took off with what I currently have, CT Scan and Dyno.
Thank you for explaining that, Alen. So you saw an opportunity on the basis that your income was reducing, and by the sounds of it, there was more demand than ever for patient recruitment, but the value of those patients was reducing. So you took control of that situation. Now, that isn't an uncommon experience, I think, over a period of time, and perhaps it may have been correlating with the fact that it was COVID at the beginning and maybe they were harder to come by. I don't know. And as the world opened up, perhaps there were more people that were willing to come forward. Maybe there was a premium around that. But as I understand it, you've also got some very clever technology. You're a very smart guy. And I think you're being very modest in the fact that you've actually spent quite a lot of time with your various backgrounds and experiences in coming up with some very clever technology around this. I'm not saying clever technology for the CT scan bit, but you can use that if you want.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'll tell you what, COVID definitely opened up budgets, right? After COVID, budgets significantly decreased. Now, it's not so much the fact that budgets decreased or increased. What people really need to understand is what is the real cost, right? What is the real cost? Because if you want to meet your enrollment quota, if you've spent $100 million worth of R&D, then you need to understand what it's going to cost to enroll X amount of subjects. And there's no better ROI, actually, return on investment, than running digital ads for your studies, which I'll delve into in just a bit. But you asked me specifically about the technology. What I clearly started to understand is, you're right, I was squeezed. That was my bread and butter. We were spending up to $15,000 some days. I'll just put it on an Amex. Daily, 15K spend. We were doing 50 studies at any given point for these large companies, and we were generating a ton of leads. And so I needed to know exactly what my margins were, because if For example, I ran blindly an ad that I expected to do well for $15K. I could blink and lose $3,000 because these ads are spending so quickly, and Facebook is spending your money so quickly to push these ads out in front of people. And so if you're not sure that you're reaching the target audience, or this is much more common, if your questionnaire is too chunky, if it's too clunky, if the wording is bad, if there's a question that's disqualifying 90% of your potential participants, which doesn't need to be there, or doesn't even need to be asked at that point in the funnel, then you can have really bad results. And it could crazily increase the cost per lead for interest. The whole idea for us was always to optimize and minimize CPL. And so we were very often reaching out to the clients and telling them, listen, this question really need to be here. Can we word it this way? But we were multiple steps removed from the sponsor because we were working through an affiliate agency. That affiliate agency was working with the subject wells, the auto recruitments, the adherence. And by the way, this is no private information. Everyone knows this, or at least the industry knows this. So it's no secret. But essentially what I realized, we ran so many trials in so many different geographies, and we had so much data on, for example, what does an Alzheimer's trial really cost with their questionnaires, with their assets, right? Okay, it's $66 in Detroit per qualified interest. How do we know that? Well, it's not just one lead that we generated. We generated about 1,000. And that's a really good sample size to understand, okay, what is the true cost of interest? And so we knew for that same study that not in Detroit, it was 67, but in Miami, it was 52. Okay. And that could be a function of older population and bigger geography or smaller geography. Essentially, what I came to realize, cost per lead is always a function in clinical trials. As long as you're keeping your ads consistent, right? And the number of questions consistent, 4 or 5 questions, there should be a blueprint for how the ad looks. The images for the ad should be just the word of what the interest is in, not a lengthy video. You need the algorithm to pick up on keywords, and you need to make the ads very simple. So across all of these ads, I can say with a high degree of confidence, and my AI, my predictive AI, Dyno AI, is predicting this with insane levels of confidence, that the cost per lead for the same study in any geography, even if I haven't ran that ad there before, I can safely say is a pretty pure function of the size of the geography and the prevalence of the indication itself. Because the United States is very unique in that respect, because you can generally say in any metropolitan area, if you know that in the United States, obesity or the prevalence of obesity is about 30%, 35%, you can safely say that in that city, it's going to be 33%, or in that metropolitan city, it's going to be 33%, or in that metropolitan city, it's going to be 33%. And that applies for rare disease as well. So Dyno AI, what it does is, firstly, it predicts the cost of pre-qualified interest, right? Now what we do is, the second step is, what is the protocol, right? Now the protocol has a ton of eligibility criteria. That determines absolutely everything downstream of the ad, because the eligibility criteria is different for every study. Even though you may have ran a similar study last year, the eligibility criteria will be different this year. So what Dyno does is we upload a protocol, we select the geography, it tells you what the cost per lead will be, predicted cost per lead. Then it takes the eligibility criteria and it fills the funnel steps as probabilities. And the 7 major funnel steps that we predict are call response rate. Actually, we use our historical data for that. We don't use the eligibility criteria, which is upwards of 60%. It's actually closer to 70%. Across the lifespan of 9 calls. Out of 9 calls, 70% of people will pick up, for us at least. Number 2, the probability number 2 is the eligibility of that potential subject for that study on the phone call itself. Number 3 is, will they, if they are eligible, will they choose to book an appointment or to show up to the site? Number 4 is, now the site needs to confirm their eligibility prior to screening. 6 is going to be screen path.
Number 5, we missed number 5.
Oh, did we? Okay, phone call eligibility. Oh, I apologize. They have to show up. So the probability of them actually showing up, and that could vary wildly. So if you have a bipolar disorder study, for example, the show up rates are very low. Older populations tend to show a little bit more frequently, younger a little less. So again, all depends on indication and therapeutic area. So that's 5. 5 is confirming, 4 was showing up, 5 is now confirming eligibility on site for screening, 6 is screen pass, screen fail rate, and 7 is enrollment. And that's an interesting one. I don't think a lot of people actually map that out. What is the probability that someone actually chooses to enroll, right? Like screen pass.
There's a lot of steps and hoops that people have to jump through. And I don't think unless you're involved in patient recruitment or you've been involved in early phase, perhaps, you've never experienced that firsthand. But as you say, coming from a Facebook ad all the way through to enrolling that patient or subject, that's quite a number of steps that have to be followed through. So I have heard on other podcasts where people talk about a concierge service where you effectively white glove those individuals to make sure that they go from step 1 all the way through to 7, they sign on the dotted line and they're enrolled and you get paid. How do you overcome some of those challenges of dropout?
Well, firstly, it's calculated for, right? It's part of the calculation. If you manage a tight funnel, and that's an interesting point because how we define cost per enrollment, which is really the most important function of Dyno that we have, is really measuring the cost per enrollment because we run ads, right? So what we want to understand is if we're working with a client, we don't want to tell them what the cost per lead is going to be, right? They don't care about that. They want to enroll patients. So the whole journey started with this kind of like, how do I measure the cost per enrollment? Is anybody else doing this? No, I don't think so. And I actually ended up patenting this methodology. So we filed a non-provisional, so it'll take some time. But it's a patent pending methodology. I'm very invested in this personally and financially. So the cost per enrollment is a function of cost per lead divided by the product of these funnel probabilities, right? Cost per lead divided by P1 times P2 times P3. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that because we have a calculator online, so you can look at it. Any small deviation in any of those funnel probabilities will result in a very different cost per enrollment, right? And so how do we factor in dropout? Dropout is a natural part of this process. But the most important parts for me, where you can save a lot of not just money, but you can increase that percentage or decrease the dropout percentage, is in the amount of time that you actually take between the interest of the person and contacting that person. For me, that is the biggest, because you can take a very simple example to put this into perspective, right? You can take a database and you can tell me what percentage of these people are going to be interested in your study. It's usually very low. It's usually very low because you're cold calling. And so one of the biggest things that we've seen also is this cold call versus hot lead duality in clinical trials, where a lot of people complain about their databases people aren't picking up, or if they buy a database from one of these recruitment vendors, for example, or even if that recruitment vendor pushes leads through an ad, the time between the actual interest and contacting the lead itself is extremely important. That's why databases, sometimes you have people that have been waiting for a year or 6 months. So that's going to be a very different result, calling 100 people from a database that have been waiting for that period of time versus calling 100 people who have signed up within the last 48 hours.
Yeah, the warm lead is really the key, isn't it? But as far as monetizing Dyno AI, if I'm a CRO or a pharmaceutical company, is there an expectation that I would invest or buy licenses to Dyno AI to get that empirical information to effectively drive the costs and overheads for a likely successful outcome?
Yeah, we run it end to end, Adam. So we would love to do it for the sponsor, right? And I can honestly say that we run an incredibly tight ship. And it's difficult. If you have a 9-to-5 situation and you have a situation where the coordinators are not invested in the actual enrollment of the study itself, then there's not a lot of motivation there to work the extra hours. And interestingly enough, most people are going to answer their phones in the evenings, not during lunchtime and not in the morning, even though we do make 3 touch points per lead per person. But if you're not calling or if you're not working during this period of time when most people are going to answer the phone, we've got a big problem. That's about 99% of the industry. So I can't really see, whether it's us or whether it's anybody else, I really can't see a winning scenario where someone's not working that call block or not actually outsourcing to a professional team to do that. And we wonder why we have problems with enrollment. When we talk to sponsors on the site level, we get budgets approved. And for the site itself, we're very site-centric. We want to make sure that they enroll. And it's a great segue to sponsors because we show them this Dyno report. So we talk to the site and we say, listen, how much did they give you in recruitment budget? Let's say they gave us $3,000. what if the cost per enrollment for the study is $3,250, right? Not only that, are you going to run the ads? Are you going to call? And we know that these slight deviations, any one of these 7, by the way, funnel steps are going to result in your CPE. If we run it and the CPE is 3,000 and you run it and there's some deviations on P3, 5 by 10 or 15%, it could be upwards of $6,000, $7,000 per enrolled patient, right? Because you're getting penalized for non-efficiencies. So this is the reality that I'm really trying to push out there. You can calculate this. It really is a numbers game. You can calculate this. But what a lot of people don't understand is that those small deviations, if you think about it in terms of numbers or one number, the small deviations can make things very fast, very slow, very expensive, very inexpensive. And so it's nice to have that laid out. And that's what Dyno does. It's nice to have it laid out so you can see and you can play with the numbers and really see how your reality changes based on your capabilities.
So you talked about the end-to-end process there that you provide. I'm also wondering how you align that from a cost point of view, because to my mind, it would be very sensible to perhaps outsource that to a lower cost region, wherever that might be for you, but also covering those time zones that you talked about and the particular times of day when you get people picking up, namely their evenings when they're not sat at a desk doing their day-to-day work. So how do you overcome that issue and challenge?
It's a great question. I think really above all, it's not so much like I don't outsource the call centers. I was actually pretty lucky. So my team's in Colombia. So they're in Medellin and they speak Spanish and English, which is hugely advantageous for us. We have so many clients in Miami and Texas and now in the United States. Spanish is a second language nearly for everybody. We have a lot of Spanish participants and stuff. But uniquely, my chief of operations, Juan Santiago Martinez, he's the last 3 years. And so he's found a group of American Colombians that live out there that do calls for us. It's that combination of that American drive, right? And then obviously their economic situation in Colombia, they don't need as much money as they would. And they're happy. And a lot of them are doing this part-time as well, right? So we'll contract someone maybe for 1 call block for the entire day, for all 3 call blocks, because we have 3 per day, sometimes just for the evening. So it's actually, it works very well. The way that we structure our work with any given client is with sites, we will never charge them per enrollment. Because if you do, they'll pay a lot. Again, it all depends on ROI. If they're making $50,000 for an enrolled patient, then something like 5K is not. It's a justifiable ROI. But what we do is we ask for an initiation fee that pays for the callers. Our maximum initiation fee is 5K. Minimum is 3,500. And we actually have our AI determine a difficulty score associated with the protocol. And that is purely eligibility criteria defined and obviously prevalence of indication, right? How difficult is it going to be to recruit? And so whether it's 3,500 or whether it's between 3,500 5K is all a function of that difficulty score. Now, what we want people to understand is that this is what it costs to work. We have callers, we have people dedicated, we have people calling at 7 p.m., right? We have to build the assets. We work directly with the site. We book the appointments directly for the site. Oftentimes we get access to the CTMS, to their system, so we can see the schedule on the eligibility call itself. We want to make sure we remove as many touch points between the potential subject and ourselves and the site as possible, because the moment you need to call someone back with availability, 60% of them will not answer the phone again. So we want to make sure that we have the appointment schedule on the eligibility call. And so that's why we integrate directly with sites. We alleviate absolutely all work from sites. That's the initial fee. Now, the advertising cost is, what is your cost per enrollment? The cost per enrollment is the dollar amount you have to spend in advertising in order to enroll one person. So if they're looking for 5 enrolled patients, or they promise to sponsor 10, it's going to be whatever that number is multiplied by the CPE. That is going to be a pure pass-through advertising spend. And so we present this to sponsors, and it's very interesting where a sponsor is already keen on spending 50K at them for a database where they don't even know what the outcome is going to be. It's a lot easier. Actually, a lot of people ask me, isn't it difficult to get this money up front? No, because they can see the justifiable ROI. They can see the breakdown of this cost per enrollment. And so it's very cool to go to a sponsor and be like, hey, listen, you gave the site 3K, but the cost per enrollment for this oncology study is 5 something, right? And they like it because they would rather spend for something that they They know that the money is actually going to have an output versus, okay, we gave this to the site. It's not going to be used. If it is used, they might just blow it because the ads are bad. They don't have that stable infrastructure.
That's very helpful. Just to follow on from that point, one of the things that has come up many times in this podcast recently is the advent of AI. And it's now dropped into everyday conversation as if it's just always been there. Now, we know, of course, it hasn't always been there. You spoke earlier about how in the last few years you've managed to develop and have a patent pending for your own AI tool. I'm wondering how you're developing that on an ongoing basis. You're training your AI. Do you have an agentic AI that you're then feeding through data that's then subsequently pushing these numbers through, and then you're constantly updating the cost of those funnels?
Great. It's a really great question. I want to really differentiate. We are not an AI company. We leverage AI to do what we do. AI is not a magic tool. And I'll just briefly, I want to segue into the AI database parsing companies. All right. So unless you have a huge database, I'm talking about huge, and even then, unless you have a huge database, it's not going to do you much good. And I'll tell you why. Because by the time, let's say you have 1,000-person database, with this AI, EHR parsing, now you've identified 3 subjects, okay? Again, database, cold. Now you've identified 3 subjects, wow, looks awesome. Really tough, rare disease study, we're gonna get $200,000 per patient, right? We invested $10K in this. First person, doesn't answer the phone. Second person, not interested. 3, screen fail. Where's the rest? Now what? Where's your other database? Where's the next funnel? Where's it? Hot leads, digital advertising. I'll stop there. That is the way to go. You need to run a hot lead funnel. That's the best way to go. So a lot of people are applying AI in ways where, yes, in theory, on paper, it could be potentially helpful, but in reality, it's not. And so that's why I don't like to say we're not an AI company. What we use AI for is for calculation, number one. Number 2 is protocol derivation, the eligibility criteria from the protocols in order to create those funnel probabilities. Now, great question in terms of our benchmark data from Facebook advertising is continuously uploaded in order to train, okay, what is the potential cost per lead, cost per interest going to be in that geography, this geography. The more data we have, the more precise that's going to be. Now, the more things we do operationally in terms of what we actually see the cost per enrollment being is also going to refine those percentages, the funnel percentages, mainly in show rate, for example, how many people show up. We really want to try to understand the characteristics of specific indications to the point where we could say, we run a bipolar disorder study in Detroit, 33% of these people, 33.5678% of these people show up. That's how accurate I want this to get. And so currently what we do is we run Monte Carlo simulations across each one of those probability points in order to show, okay, at this confidence level, this is what it's going to be. This is what CPE is going to be at this confidence level. So when we do contracts with clients, we show them 3 different possibilities. We have the low, we have the moderate risk, and then we have the, hey, this is likely what you need to spend. But what's even more interesting is that the cost per enrollment, even in those scenarios, doesn't vary by more than $100 or $200. Meaning that our cost per enrollment calculator is very precise in a perfect world, right? For as long as everyone is maintaining those consistency across the funnel in terms of calling, following up, and things like that.
So it sounds like you've got pretty good confidence in the numbers that you're putting out there. Another thing that came to mind when you were talking about your people making calls in Colombia and the Spanish language, as I understand it, the company is very US centric at the moment. Is that the intention moving forward? Have you thought about other Spanish speaking nations, for example? Because that would cover an awful lot of the globe, wouldn't it?
For sure. As a matter of fact, we have a site network in Colombia. That was actually part of it. My buddy runs, I don't know if you're familiar with HIMS. It's a company. It's a company in the United States that makes products for men. So anything from pills for ED to hair loss to everything man-centered, HIMS. So my buddy made something similar in South America. It's called Rogan's. And he has hair transplant clinics. And the first thing I thought is, why don't you do clinical research? And that's exactly what we ended up doing. So this is an announcement I made within the last few months, but we have yet to run trials there, but it is an offer that I present to sponsors. And Colombia is one of those emerging, I think the biggest pool of clinical research centers or just clinical trial activity. I think it's either Brazil or Argentina or one way or another, 1, 2. And then you have Colombia, which is emerging 3. So yeah, we do have that. So any Spanish speaking, any Commonwealth country, we can run ads in. The United States, of course, there's so much volume here that for the time being, we're more focused on refining this model, right? Because then if I go into a different country, now I have a new set of data that I need to work on or work from. But I'm very keen on getting that first trial started somewhere in Brazil or Colombia, just so I have those first CPL numbers. Now, if I know CPE in South American countries, that would be very cool.
That could be very powerful because it's it's a huge part of the world, a huge continent. And as I say, from a linguistic point of view, you've already got it covered. So thank you for clarifying that. That's very helpful. I'm just wondering along the way, you're a very motivated guy, Alen, and with your background in sport and coming through university sports, I'm sure there must have been some mentors along the way that looked out for you and showed you the right path outside of just your parents. I'm wondering if there's anyone that you can think of that perhaps did give you some guidance along the way, because we have a lot of young people that listen to this podcast and they're always looking for that into the industry or the opportunity to open doors. I'd love to hear your experiences of that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'll flip that on its head a little bit. I'm super stubborn. Like I rarely listen to advice. But the one thing that I could definitely say is that I'm a very, very extroverted person. And just through those connections that just naturally led me one way or another. One huge influence is my coach, Alexei Cheremsky, because I was a big fencer. Alexei Cheremsky was my second father. I spent more time with him, I think, between the ages of 16 and 30 than I did with my own father, I think. And he's also very hard-headed, so we clash all the time. But sport taught me this insane motivation and dedication, especially him. It's like, yeah, you don't show up at least 20 minutes before practice and get warmed up and everything. There's no reason for you to be at practice. Like, where does the motivation start? Does it start when practice starts, or is it before? And that drive really took me places. In terms of influential, my dad is insane. My mother and my father are some of the biggest influences in my life. My mom is a PhD in French literature. She's a French and Latin professor. My father is a famous anesthesiologist who came from Bosnia, came from nothing, very poor, and made a name for himself. And he has this insane drive. I'm waking up now working on my company at 4 a.m., but I've never seen anyone just move on 1 hour of sleep for an extended period of time. It's pretty remarkable. So they're hugely influential in my life for supporting my sports, supporting my skateboarding. I was almost a sponsored skateboarder, supporting my guitar, drums, all my crazy stuff, supporting my college. And I would say the people that I've met in clinical trials just recently are pretty remarkable, like yourself, for example. Ali McPherson, Ryan Helber, my chief of strategy, Claxton Copeland, so many people, Jennifer Goodman, who now works for us, just really remarkable people. I think just to sum my answer up, it's really what you give out there. What you give out there is what you get. And I think I've always had a positive attitude that, hard-headed or not, someone popped up that gave me the idea I should go there, right? So if anything, I'm thankful to everybody that I've met in my life.
I appreciate your answer there. And actually, there is a common theme that runs through many of our podcasts, which is around how people show up, not just in their daily lives, but actually outside of their day-to-day work. The motivation and the drive and determination that you've demonstrated clearly to get to an Olympic level in fencing, I beg your pardon, demonstrates to me that you are that guy. And this is something that I speak to my own kids about and various other students at my alumni. It's that showing up when no one else is watching, isn't it? That's really what we're talking about. The only person that's checking you out is your reflection. No one else is going to get you out of bed in the morning. If you can't motivate yourself to pull on your own socks and make your own cup of tea or coffee in the morning, no one else is going to do it for you. And whatever your parents demonstrated to you was, this is how to live your life, and you're following it forward with that. So I think it's really helpful. And thank you for providing that insight, Alen. I'm sure they'll love to hear that back as well, by the way. At this point in the conversation, I love to conclude with a quick fire round.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, what is the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self, Alen?
To my younger self? Oh, that's a great question. I don't think I would listen to myself, honestly, even if I were to. Next question.
You're the first person that said that, I must say.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, all right, older Alen, go away. I got my That's as honest as an answer as I'll give you. You learn through experience. And especially me, there was nothing anybody could tell me until I've experienced it for myself. That's the way I've always been, to the extreme. This is the way I've been. Sure, open your ears a little bit. Listen, I don't know. A major thing I would say is let life do the work a little bit for you, right? I think that's probably a good one because I always tried to manipulate my outcomes. I always tried to force them. And that's really the part of who I am. That's where that drive comes from, whether it be fencing. I have to make the Olympics. I have to do this. I have to do that. I really tried to force this to happen. And it happened, but it came with a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain throughout that journey. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of, after competitions, you're by yourself, you're locking yourself up in your room. There's no reason, there's no point in all of that. If you can tell yourself, okay, if you're confident in that, you've spent enough time trying to achieve what you tried to achieve and you didn't accomplish it, you should be okay with that. And that's, to my former self, I would never listen to that advice.
That's really good. What are the top 3 qualities you value most when building a team, Alen?
Be there. Be there. Show me that you're interested. Show me that this means something to you as much as it means to me as it means to you. And just showing up. But it's tough to find yourself, obviously. But if I know that someone is reliable and can be there and has a strong and firm understanding, and I tell them, hey, listen, you need to be on this phone call in order to understand this part of the business, though, I'm there. That's Ryan Helberg in a nutshell. That's my chief of strategy. That's something that I appreciate a lot. Number 2 is, I don't know, it's quite a lot. Number 1 is a big one. Number 1 is big. Number 2 would be a good attitude. Nobody likes a miser, right? I don't like to be super corporate. I like to be very positive. I'm outspoken and I don't want anyone to shy away from who they are. Don't bring your work self, bring yourself, because that's really what I'm looking for. And honestly, a third would be a stretch, Adams. Keep it.
That's good enough for me. You know, I think you've been entirely honest and truthful about that. So thank you, Alen. And your favorite thing outside of work, you've alluded to several passions, hobbies, but I'm wondering what is the favorite thing?
Music. Hands down. I can't live without music.
Is there a particular type?
Yeah, heavy metal, death metal, thrash metal, black metal. I'm a really big metal, but I'll tell you, I grew up on, so Jimi Hendrix is my favorite guitarist. Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix. I love John Mayer. I'm not huge on commercial pop rock, but he's just an absolute incredible guitarist. Some of my influences, I grew up on Deep Purple, Pink Floyd. That's one my dad brought me up on. And then I bought Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, and everything changed from that day on. Metallica's Ride the Lightning, and then it quickly, I needed faster, heavier, just more intense. Because once I heard that music, I didn't know people could play that fast, and that just infatuated me. I'm actually recording an album as well.
That sounds like a podcast for another day.
Yeah, sure.
Alen Hadzic's music background. And finally, what is your number 1 golden rule in life and in business, Alen?
Number 1 goal for the business?
In golden rule in life and in business.
Oh, golden rule in life and in business. Show up. I think you'd be surprised at what you can accomplish if you wake up in bed, you're tired, and you say, let me just get up and start doing things. You'll be surprised at how much energy you have. I think that's something that I started to realize in the last year and a half as I've been scaling this business. In sports, I never had to wake up at 4 a.m. But if you're fighting against multi-billion dollar, not fighting, but you're trying to get contracts, competing against, another bad word, but whatever, we'll use it, against multi-billion dollar companies, you got to work. And there've been plenty of times when I've woken up and I've set my alarm for 4 and I'm like, man, are you serious? And I get up, and by the time I have my first call at 9:30, I've done 5 days worth of work. Kobe Bryant actually said it best. He said, look, if you're a basketball player and you do your practice from 11 to 1, fine. You go home, have your lunch. Now you're back at practice, evening practice from 6 to 8. Go home, go to sleep. Now imagine you wake up at 4, you get your first practice in between. You eat between 5:30 and 7:30, go home, rest a little bit, get another practice in between 9 and 10:30, now at 11, now at 7. So you get twice the amount of practice that everyone else does. So you might not see the difference today or tomorrow, but 5 years later, no one can ever catch up with you in terms of how much time and effort you put. No, it's just not possible, right? While I guess I do take that to heart, maybe a little bit, and maybe I'm an extreme type of person. It's true. It's very true. The amount of work that Ryan and I have been able to do with CT scan, especially when Ryan got on board in the last 3 months, is absolutely insane. And looking forward to more.
I think that's really a lovely way to tie up the conversation today, Alan. We've talked about how you got into this industry in the first instance, some of the things that have driven you, and your complete drive and determination to make a success of clinical trial scan. And I absolutely, having known you for a little period of time now, over the period of time that we've spoken, you have an energy that is quite distinct and clear. And I hope that comes across in this podcast when our audience are listening to this. For anyone that wants to get in contact with you, Alan, what's the best way to make contact with you and your company?
Yeah, our website. It's dyno, D-Y-N-O dot clinical trial scan, dyno.clinicaltrialscan.ai. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My website link is there as well. But I've purposely made that website. I've transplanted my brain to that website. So anything and everything you can possibly know about Dyno and how it works, including simulations, including how to contact us, and everything is on that website.
As I say, I want to thank you once again for coming on Pharma Prescribed today. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you a little bit further, Alan. And I'm really looking forward to following the story as it continues for you and your company. Plaudits to everything that you've created thus far and the energy with which you come to work every day.
Thanks, Adam. This is an awesome opportunity, awesome podcast. You know that I'm a fan, so it's a pleasure to be on here.
Thank you.